My friends, welcome to the 5th episode of this Jagdtiger build. Today is gonna be all about dust and mud, aka earth tones. We're also gonna deal with the tracks and mount them in place. And if you're not caught up on this series, the previous videos have a lot of information about how we've gotten to this point. And also, if you're new here, there are gonna be a few more episodes until this model is finished, so make sure to subscribe if you don't wanna miss them. And with that being said, my friends, let's get started. So, as in most cases, I decided to start with textured earth from Wilder. It's an acrylic product that dries really fast and strong and has a beautiful subtle texture once the water evaporates. By the way, just so you know, I shot this video on my new camera, Canon EOS M50, and I'm still getting used to it, so when you sometimes see it, focusing in and out, that's all on me. It won't happen in the future, at least not so often. Anyway, I had a specific idea for this model. Because it operated in spring of 1945 and photos show it in a rather dry environment, I wanted to keep the amounts of build-up mud rather subtle. So I was pretty much happy with just one layer of this paste. I applied it in the same way as usual, so I brushed it on and then quickly blended the edges with tap water. We must work very fast because the paste will start drying almost immediately, so it's ideal to apply it in a small portion, let's say 1/2 of the lower hull side, and then quickly blend it. Honestly, I don't know why I was so meticulous in these places, because once the running gear is assembled, we won't see anything. There will be like 5% of these effects visible. But hey, I suppose it's for that nice feeling that it's there, and also for the sake of demonstration. The rear plate has no mud guards. Well, the entire tank has no mud guards. But here it means dirt was definitely thrown up by the moving tracks, but again, I kept it very limited. And same thing with the wheels. Because I have glued them together for easier painting and weathering, I'm actually describing this life hack in the construction video, linked down below. I can easily distinguish between rear and front wheels. What this means in practice is that more mud would be present on the back wheels because this is where it's falling from the moving track, and by the time the track reaches the front wheels, a lot of mud would have already fallen off. It's also nice to have some variety, so the occasional wheel with more mud is gonna make the whole assembly look more interesting. So let's now put the textured mud aside and create some loose dirt effects. This is not what it looks like. It's just a glass jar where I store dirt from my garden, so we're gonna use that and also dry sea ball, which is a ball of dried grass made in the sea. Now, this is a method which I enjoy a lot because nothing adds more texture to a model like pieces of random debris and natural scatter. But hey, that's just my opinion, it's not a modeling theory. And I know, dirt collecting around the highest point of an already huge vehicle like Jagdtiger seems rather odd, but I actually have a black and white picture showing exactly this. It was sent to me by one of my patrons, but he asked me not to share it because it probably comes from a private collection, so you'll just have to believe me. Anyway, so far I've been using gravel and sand fixer from AK Interactive to hold this type of stuff in place. It has one huge disadvantage though. It melts the paint underneath, so it has to be applied sparingly, and once it's there, adjustments are not possible. So this time I decided to try Ballast Freeze from VMS. This product is water-based and can be applied without any worries because it won't attack the paint. One would think I should just use diluted PVA glue, but PVA leaves a visible film on the surface when it dries, and when it's applied in small amounts like this, it won't hold up against enamel thinners. I know this from my own experience because one time when I was building an IDF tank, I made the anti-slip surface from fine sand fixed with diluted PVA glue. And when I was washing the model with soapy water, prior to painting, the entire anti-slip just went completely down. In fact, this product can be used in a completely different way. Here I just placed a random clump of seagrass, then I added a drop of Ballast Freeze, and then I moved the grass around in place until I was happy with it. This approach provides even more control than scattering the stuff on the surface and then dropping a fixing medium on top of it. Because of this, we're also able to permanently fix even small amounts of debris like these individual grass strands just chilling out in the open. When it's all dry, the product will leave a very slight, just very slight shiny surface similar to what gravel and sand fixer does, but no milky film like PVA glue. So let's now create some pre-dusting. I mixed a reasonably light, desaturated dust color from these paints, and the ratio was something like this. Of course, I also diluted the paint a lot with Mr. Color Thinner, and then I proceeded to spray over everything we applied so far. So this means the textured earth, which even though it has a pretty okay color on its own, but this way we can repaint it exactly the way we want. And the airbrushed earth also smoothens out the transition between the stippled mud paste and the clean parts. Once we start moving towards the upper portion, things get more tight, and we must be careful not to overdo the effect. This is where lots of dried mud will be, but I'm still keeping the pre-dusting quite subtle, pretty much just focusing it on the lower edge. The front is the same thing, but even less, just a tiny splash of dust. And the upper portions, aka horizontal plates, here we have the loose debris as our guide. I usually paint all over it, even though the dried seagrass has a pretty nice color on its own. This way we can again create a smooth transition between piles of dirt and clean parts. And also give the debris a more unified color, which we can then again break apart with enamel paints. And also, most importantly, we're able to paint over the satin spots left over by the fixing medium. We could also use matte varnish to hide them, but you know how much I'm against unnecessary varnishing, especially when it's applied between layers of weathering. There's just no need for that. So anyway, we have all the initial layers in place. Textures with acrylic mud, more textures with loose earth and dried grass, and also a nice, subtle airbrushed foundation for the upcoming enamel effects. I'm starting to believe that airbrush can be used for more than just a basic pre-dusting, and more skilled modelers might be even able to pull off most of the weathering with it, but still, there are things which are always better done with paintbrushes. So let's switch over to some enamel paints. If these are somehow suspiciously similar to the ones I used on the Hutsche and Tiger one, it's because they're pretty much identical. For example, the light dry earth tone was mixed the same way from about 90% dry earth from Splash's range and 10% earth. Cool names, by the way. But anyway, the entire weathering will be carried out with just these two colors. So, the easiest and most obvious place to start is the lower hull, because this is where most of the effects are always gonna be concentrated. Again, I'm keeping in mind the natural transition from back towards the front, so here I'm quite generous with the application, and also, in order to save me some time, I'm immediately adding some of the loose ground, which is the darker color. And you know, I'm just letting it to get absorbed by the lighter paint. Somewhat similar to what I did on the last diorama base, it's the so-called wet blending technique. The same story is around the dry sprocket, but the amount of dust is more limited here. Obviously, we can't forget the underside, because what if someone will look down there, you know? Especially if it's gonna be some final raid boss IPMS judge. Now we're gonna have more fun, because speckling is always fun. These ammo paints are a bit thicker than regular enamel paints, and they also have a bit of texture added in. They're called splashes after all, so they're ideal for this task. And it's a great way to add more texture and create a more natural look. These specks were layered in the same order like the layers before, so starting with the light dry matte tone and finishing with the darker color. Just make sure there are not too many tightly packed splashes next to each other, because then the effect is gonna look quite, monotonous. If more contrast is needed, we can always brush on the darker tone straight from the bottle and place it into crevices and other places where moisture can remain for a longer time. It's not like this is gonna be visible in any way, but again, it's for that good inner feeling and also to show you what can be done in a relatively short amount of time with essentially just two paints. I'm not counting the earth color because I only used it to slightly desaturate the dry earth. And also, like I said in the beginning, this Jagdtiger was operating in spring until it was abandoned in April. So this mud palette is gonna work pretty well with that dry-ish springtime weather. The same techniques were employed on the running gear, so first I brushed on the light dry earth tone and then I added a few darker stains while the previous paint was still wet. Then once it was all dry I proceeded with speckling. It's very interesting how each different colored wheel contrasts with the earth tones, and also the varying amounts of mud and dust are creating a little show on their own. We also need to take care of the polished outer sections on them, but we'll get back to this later as now we're dealing just with the mud tones. So, moving on to the upper surfaces, I kept the amount of dust and mud very limited here. It was pretty much just a few stains of the light tone, which I then blended in a swiping motion. If we're gonna follow gravity, as if the dust was washed down by, let's say, rain, it's important to use the upper edge as our guide, because this edge is horizontal. The lower side is slanted and it goes lower and lower towards the back. It messed with my perception a few times, so keep it in mind when you're working on your Jagdtiger or King Tiger. Actually, it also applies to a Tiger 1, Panther, Jagdpanther and also E50 and E75, so pretty much the entire German army. The only obvious place where the earth tones can be added in heavier amounts is again the back where mud flies straight up. We'll get back to this part in a second because this is not even the final effect. The large slabs on the sides require some dust as well, otherwise they'd be quite unnaturally clean. But also the dust can't be too evident, so I only added a few blobs of paint and blended them into these white but subtle streaks of dust. Luckily we can always go back and add more, and actually keep that in mind for next week's video. So, moving on, remember how I said the rust-colored tow cables are gonna look spot on with some earth tones applied? Yeah, they just need a simple random earth wash which will nicely bring out their texture. We still need to add the final metallic sheen, but again, keep that in mind until the next week. So, now we can add some more speckling. I focused it only on this part, which we left just a few moments ago, and I wasn't too shy with the amount. It's not a bad idea to be careful and avoid splattering the entire model or just places where the mud shouldn't be. And here I, for example, made an imaginary border between the splattered and relatively clean sections. The same applies to the rear plate, because this is always a good place to add lots of mud splashes. Of course, only if the mud guards are missing, otherwise no splashes, because mud guards are there to prevent that. And if we apply the mud from a good angle, like for example below, we can also create small authentic details like this tail light covered in mud from the bottom. No doubts, the easiest parts to weather are horizontal plates. Not only they're cluttered with random details and fixtures like periscopes and hatches, but we also have the road map made from pre-dusting and natural debris. So this might be the most straightforward process of them all, although I didn't just brush the paint over the debris but also added some out in the open. Also, I decided to blend it straight away and not mix the different tones together randomly, because after all, you know, these places are kinda gonna be the most visible, so even though the process is easy and straightforward, the extra amount of control is always welcome, and I applied the darker tones mostly around crevices and the loose dirt. Mind you, this doesn't necessarily have to represent damp mud or anything. If the paint is more translucent, it can just add more tones, making the result more interesting without necessarily representing mud or whatever. Also, because these splashes colors from ammo contain more pigments, once they're dry, they can sometimes leave these visible stains. There might be cases where something like this is welcome, but I don't like them at all here, so I used a completely dry brush to carefully wipe the excess pigment away. Also check out the engine deck. Anyway, this video is again getting longer than I wanted, so let's wrap this up real quick. So, steel road wheels. This means painting their contact points with silver Tamiya paint and letting it dry thoroughly. Applying it with a paintbrush means longer drying time because the paint layer is less even compared to airbrushing. So once they're fully cured, I for example left them to dry overnight to be safe, I polished them with dark metallic pigment from VMS, and the weird black thing is a sculpting brush with a silicone tip. Super cool and heavy metal looking. Now we have the running gear finished and we can move on to the tracks. These are from Friul model, and although I complained a lot about their quality, especially the needlessly long assembly time, they're still a lot of fun to paint and weather. I'm again using Black Track Pro from VMS, but this time I'm only gonna use the blue stuff. Of course there's a lot of preparation required, but I did the bare minimum and just degreased them in acetone. Make sure you perform this in a well-ventilated room because acetone smells real bad and it destroys your brain cells. OGs of this channel know that I like to use my blackening fluid sparingly, and instead of dunking the entire track, I prefer applying the fluid with an old toothbrush. It might take longer, but I feel a lot better afterwards, and it's not because of the fumes. Once the process is done, the tracks look just like the real thing. Even the quote-unquote unwanted spots of residue look like dried mud trapped in the pattern, and they would fit beautifully on an abandoned vehicle. But we're making a Jagdtiger in action, so we need to weather them the same way using the same colors. This means a light random layer of textured earth. I kept it really light this time and I made sure to press it into the pattern. Then a very heavy wash of the light earth color mixed from earth and dry earth. And while it was still wet, I added a few stains of loose ground. This was very easy on the outer side because of all the texture and crevices. The inner side is just a flat, plain nothingness and the paint has no bite, so it's best to just quickly smear it all over the whole thing, quickly add a few stains of darker color and set it aside to fully dry. Then I continued with speckling using the same colors, again starting with the lighter tone and finishing with the darker one. It might seem a bit unfortunate that most of the burnished metal surface is hidden under a layer of earth, but it serves as a primer, which is etched into the otherwise smooth metal surface, and this means paint won't start randomly flaking off. So it doesn't have just aesthetical purpose, but also functional. Again, we need to leave the track for a while to dry. These huge amounts of enamel paint and thinner require about half an hour to evaporate, and then we can proceed with polished surfaces. I took full advantage of the shiny metal they're made of and used a metal file to remove the paint from guide horns. A small file is more suitable here because we're working on a very tiny surface. That's obviously not the case on the ice cleats, so here I used a large sanding stick. These were usually completely worn down, but I already did the same thing on the Tiger, so I decided to leave them there. Just so I can have, two similar tanks with slightly different looking tracks. The inner points are polished from road wheels. A Jagdtiger has 4 rows of wheels, so that means 4 polished strips along the entire track. Here I had to use a graphite stick to simulate the polished metal, and fun fact, the dry to the touch yet not completely dried enamel paint creates a very good grippy surface and the graphite just sticks to it without any hassle. Now at first I wanted to go full sand with files, but I don't have any suitable sized file or sanding stick to perform this task, and I was just too lazy to cut strips of sandpaper for this one occasion, so yeah, I went with the good old graphite technique. The result is pretty good if I do say so myself, and the track isn't covered in soaking wet mud, so again, I think this will fit pretty well with the springtime setting of the scene. So now I can put the tracks in place, but let me tell you, we're not entirely done. But unfortunately, we don't have more time this week, so I'm just gonna swipe to the final presentation. And while the model might look like it's pretty much done, there's still a lot to do. There are finishing touches like smoke residue, grease stains, polished metal, some water and moisture effects here and there, but before we even get to these, I still want to make some adjustments with more earth colors. Tracks usually give us the best idea about how the whole thing looks, and there's still a lot of places where I can add more dust, dry mud, but also the darker earth colors. I might also add more earth effects on the tracks, but I'm not quite sure. I'm just thinking aloud right now. And then there's one more thing I'm gonna try replicating. Tree branches, just like on the real Jagdtiger 331. I also want to add some carried stowage, but this time it's probably gonna be just some metal stuff like jerry cans and a toolbox. I mean, we'll see. And I'm keeping Hans, the tank commander, for the very end. I'm gonna make a video about him regardless of the result, so he's either gonna be a very nice or very putrid cherry on top, in which case I won't use him and I'll just rather close the hatch. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if so, then give it a like and make sure to drop by the next week for those finishing touches and I don't know. So, thank you very much for watching. I deeply appreciate you taking the time to sit here with me. And also, thank you to my cool patrons who help me make these weekly videos. My Patreon page is like a magazine subscription, so if you by any chance decide to join, you'll not only help me tremendously, but you'll also get a lot of stuff in return, such as almost daily photo updates from my workbench, which include additional information and these kinda fresh thoughts of mine about what I did that day. Also 1 week early ad-free videos, so you might be able to watch the finishing episode right now. Also these very nice downloadable pictures in full resolution. And of course DMs, so we can get in touch and you can show me your models, ask for advice, or anything you might think of. Anyway, that's all I've got, my friends, so again, I hope we'll meet again the next week, and until then, have a great weekend, day or evening, stay safe, have fun, give the video a like if you enjoyed it or a dislike if you didn't, and I'll catch you, my friends, very soon. Cheers!